He only loses control once a year, and just days before the blood moon, the one woman he should never have touched arrived in his village. He had one rule: never let anyone get too close before the blood moon, but this mysterious woman somehow managed to make him break that rule. The road to Ashwick is the kind that makes you question your GPS. It narrows twice. It crosses a bridge that looks like it was built by people who didn't trust the future. And then, just when you've convinced yourself you've made a wrong turn, the village appears. Not dramatically. Not with any fanfare. It simply materializes out of the gray October mist like a memory you can't quite place. Sarah Vale had been driving for 3 hours. Her back seat was a scholarly disaster. Field notebooks, a camera bag, a thermos of now-cold coffee, and a stack of photocopied folklore records from the University of Leeds. She was here because of a footnote. Page 312 of an 1887 compendium of Northern English folk traditions. One paragraph. An unnamed researcher, writing about Ashwick. The villagers of this settlement hold peculiar ceremonies in the weeks before All Hallows. They speak of a covenant made long ago with something that runs in the dark. They do not call it a curse. They call it a gift. They do not speak its name before strangers. That was enough for Sarah. It was always enough. One oblique reference in a dusty book, and she was packing a bag. Her colleagues called it obsession. She called it methodology. She stood on the high street. One pub, one post office, a church with no clock tower, and pulled out her phone to find her rental cottage. No signal. Of course, no signal. She was looking down at the useless screen when she walked directly into a wall. Except the wall caught her.
Easy.
Watch your step. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed, tall, with the kind of stillness that didn't belong to someone who'd simply stopped moving. It was the stillness of something that had chosen, very deliberately, to hold itself in place. Dark coat,
Dark eyes.
a jaw that looked like it had been argued over. He was holding her by both arms.
Gently.
The way you might hold something fragile that you hadn't expected to be holding. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I wasn't looking where you were going," he finished.
No.
"You weren't. You're the rental cottage?"
She realized how that sounded.
"I mean, do you know where Lark Cottage is?" "I'm renting it for a week." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite wariness.
Something more complicated than that.
"Down the lane. Turn left at the dry stone wall. You'll see the red door." "Thank you. I'm Sarah." He looked at her hand for a moment. Then he took it. Callum. She would think about his hand later. Not in a romantic way, not yet, not then. She would think about how warm it was. Unusually warm. Like he was running a fever that had settled into something comfortable. The cottage was everything the photographs had promised, and nothing a sensible person would choose in October. Stone floors. A fireplace that needed coaxing. Windows that rattled. Sarah loved it immediately. She unpacked her notebooks first. Always the notebooks first. She taped a hand-drawn map of the village to the wall above the kitchen table, and she began marking the locations she needed to visit. The church. The old well at the edge of the common. The standing stone on the hill north of the village that the OS map labeled, inexplicably, as the witness. And then her stomach made its own agenda, and she pulled on her coat and went to find the pub. The moorhen was warm and low-ceilinged and smelled of wood smoke and old upholstery. Half a dozen locals nursed their drinks with the unhurried ease of people who had nowhere better to be. They looked at Sarah the way villages like this always look at newcomers. Not hostile, just assessing, filing the information away. The woman behind the bar was in her 70s. Iron gray hair pinned back. Eyes the color of slate. "You'll be the folklore woman," she said. Not a question. "News travels fast," Sarah said. "News is all that does here." "I'm Marin. Sit down. I'll bring you something hot." Sarah sat. She ordered the lamb stew and a glass of red wine, and she began, as she always began, by saying nothing and watching everything. That was when she saw Callum again. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, alone. A glass of water in front of him. Not beer, water, and a book open on the counter that he didn't appear to be reading. He was watching the fire. Or he was watching something in the fire. There's a difference, though it's hard to explain. Marin set down the stew.
Leaned in.
Leave that one alone, she said quietly. Not unkindly. I wasn't. You were looking. It's fine to look. Just leave him be. He's not for everyone. What does that mean? It means eat your stew while it's hot. Marin walked away. Sarah looked at her stew. Then she looked at Callum. He was still watching the fire. But now, for just a moment, he was also watching her. She found the witness at 7 a.m, half swallowed by mist and bracken. It was a single standing stone, about her height, rough-hewn, with markings she didn't recognize on its eastern face. Not runic, not ogham, something older or something invented, or something that had never needed a name because the people who carved it knew what they meant. She was crouching beside it, tracing the markings with her finger, when she heard footsteps. You're out early. Callum's voice. She didn't jump this time. She registered the warmth of it and held still.
So are you, she said.
I run every morning. This is my route. He was wearing a gray long-sleeve top, running shoes. His breath clouded in the cold air, but not as much as hers did.
She noticed that.
Filed it away, without knowing why. Do you know what these markings mean? She asked. He came closer, looked at the stone. Something about the way he looked at it suggested he'd looked at it many times before. The old families used to say it marked the boundary between the tame land and the wild land. The wild land being the moor? The wild land being whatever lives on the moor. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, like a man reciting geography. The covenant, Sarah said. She watched his face. The 1887 account mentioned a covenant, with something that runs in the dark. Silence. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Where did you read that? University archive. Why? Because some things are better left in archives. He turned to leave. She stood up. Callum. He stopped. I'm not here to cause trouble. I study stories. I document them. I don't take things that aren't mine. He turned back. The mist was thick between them, and for a moment she could only see his outline, the shape of him against the gray morning. The trouble with stories, he said quietly, is that sometimes you start telling one and don't realize until too late that you're standing inside it. He ran back down the hill. She watched him go. She wrote everything down. The vicar, a mild man named Prentice who seemed perpetually surprised that anyone still attended his church, let Sarah into the records room without much persuasion. She sat there for 4 hours. The Dre name appeared in Ashwick's registers going back to the 16th century. They'd been farmers, then shepherds, then, in the 19th century, something the records became cautious about. Entries that referenced a responsibility the Dre's held on behalf of the village. A guardianship of the common land. One entry, from 1887, the same year as her footnote, was written in a different hand. Shakier. More urgent. The Dre line holds. God willing, it holds. The moon rises in 3 days and Thomas Dre has sworn to remain within the boundary stone. We pray it is enough. We pray the covenant holds another generation. We pray for his soul. We pray for ours. Sarah stared at that entry for a long time. Thomas Dre. Callum's brother was named Thomas. She walked out of the church into the gray afternoon and stood in the graveyard, reading headstones she didn't have notes for, buying time to think. Then she heard her name. Sarah. Marin was standing at the Lych gate, hands folded, waiting. "I thought I might find you here," the old woman said. "Walk with me." They walked the perimeter of the village. Marin spoke carefully, not cautiously, but the way someone speaks when they've been waiting a long time to say something and want to get the words right. "You've read the records," Marin began. "Some of them." "Then you know the Dre family have been part of this village for a very long time. Longer than the records show. The records only began to tell it in the 16th century because that's when someone thought to write it down." "Tell me the rest," Sarah said. Marin looked at her, measuring. "A long time ago, longer than I can say, longer than anyone can say, a man came out of the northern wilderness and asked this village for shelter. He'd been running for weeks.
He was starving.
He was wounded, and he was not entirely a man. A werewolf." Marin didn't flinch from the word, but she also didn't embrace it. The people who built this village didn't have a word like that. They called it a shifting. A man who could call the wolf into himself and release it. The covenant was simple. The Dre bloodline would remain. They would protect the village, patrol the moor, keep other things at bay. And in return, the village would keep their secret. Feed them. Shelter them. Look away on the nights the moon called. And Callum is the last of them. Yes. Sarah stopped walking. "Does he know I know?" "He will now." Marin said it without apology. She said it like a woman who had made a decision and would live with it. "Why are you telling me?" Sarah asked. "Why now?" Marin looked up. The sky to the east was already darkening, and something in it, a depth, a redness at the horizon that hadn't been there the night before, made the air feel different. Because the blood moon rises in 2 nights. And every blood moon, the covenant renews, or it breaks. It's renewed every time for 400 years. But this year, she paused. Callum doesn't want to renew it. He's been living half a life, running from himself. And you've arrived at exactly the wrong time or the right one. I've never been sure which it was. You think I can change his mind? I think you're already changing something. I'm asking you to be careful with it. He was at the cottage, not inside. He wouldn't come in uninvited. She'd learned that later, that he was always precise about thresholds. But he was sitting on the wall outside, in the dark, waiting. Marin told you, he said. Not a question. Yes. She sat down on the wall beside him, close enough to be deliberate. He noticed. He didn't move away. Are you frightened? He asked. No. You should be. Probably. But I'm not. She looked at him. How long have you been doing that? Warning people away from you. A long pause. Since I was 17. When I first shifted, my father sat me down and said, anyone who gets close to you is in danger. Remember that. Remember it always. And you believed him. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't entirely right either. Callum turned to look at her. In the darkness, his eyes caught a glint of something, moonlight off water, maybe, or something less explicable. You're a folklore researcher. You study this subjectively. I did. Until 2 days ago. Silence. The comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. Tell me about it, she said. The shifting. Tell me what it's actually like. Not the myth. Not the covenant. You. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you know that feeling when you've been sitting still too long? That restlessness. That need to move? Multiply it by 1,000. Imagine it's not just in your muscles, but in your bones. In your blood. Like your body is trying to remind you of something it knew before you were born. That's what the moon does. Every full moon. But the blood moon. He stopped. The blood moon is different, Sarah said softly. The blood moon doesn't ask. It commands. She reached out, laid her hand over his. He went very still. The particular stillness she'd noticed before, the deliberate kind. Callum, what happens if you don't renew the covenant? He looked down at her hand on his. I don't know. No one in my line has ever refused. It's not been done. But you want to. I want to be free of it.
Yes.
I want one life. One whole, ordinary, quiet life. He turned his hand over beneath hers, not to dislodge it, to hold it. Is that selfish?
No, she said.
It's human. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, if it had been a fraction less sad. I'm not entirely human. Nobody is, Sarah said. Entirely. The next morning, Sarah found a young man on her doorstep. He had Callum's jaw and a less guarded version of his eyes. You're Sarah, he said. I'm Thomas, Callum's brother. Can I come in? He sat at her kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea and the urgency of someone who had been holding something in for too long. He hasn't told you everything, Thomas said. He told me more than he probably intended to. He didn't tell you what the blood moon means for him, not just the covenant. For him personally. Sarah waited. Every blood moon, the wolf is fully in control. Not a shifting, a full surrender. Callum goes somewhere he can't reach. And the wolf runs. All night. And in the morning. Thomas looked at his tea. He's never hurt anyone. In 10 years, he's never hurt anyone. But he loses himself. And every time, it gets a little harder to come back. He told you this? He told me the first time. He hasn't spoken about it since. He doesn't talk about things that frighten him. He just builds walls around them. Sarah looked at her map on the wall, at the standing stone, at the phrase she'd written and circled. The covenant renews or breaks. What does renewing the covenant actually do for him? For the wolf. It gives him a kind of anchor. The covenant isn't just an obligation. It's a structure. Something that holds the wolf and the man together. Without it, Thomas stopped. We don't know. But Marin says without the covenant, the two natures will war with each other. Until one wins. And which one wins? Not the man, Thomas said quietly. Not anymore. He's too tired. The rain came harder against the windows. She found him at the standing stone. He was sitting with his back against it, knees drawn up, watching the horizon where the sky was already beginning to bruise, crimson at the edges, the first suggestion of what the night was going to become. You shouldn't be here, he said. He didn't say it harshly. I know. The moon rises in 2 hours. I know that too. She sat down beside him, closer than before, close enough that their shoulders touched. Thomas told you, he said. Yes. And you came here anyway. And I came here anyway. He turned to look at her. In the reddening light, there was something different about him. Not frightening, not other, but heightened, like a note held just before it resolves.
Sarah.
I've spent 10 years making sure no one was close enough to get hurt. And then you arrived, and in 3 days he stopped. Looked away. You make me want things I don't have the right to want. Why don't you have the right? Because I am what I am. Because I lose myself every blood moon. Because you deserve something whole. Someone whole. Sarah was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the bracken. The sky kept bleeding. I study things that are old and strange and misunderstood, she said. I have done my entire adult life. And the thing I've learned, the only thing that really matters, is that most of what people call monstrous is just misunderstood. It's just something that doesn't fit a tidy category. She met his eyes. You're not a monster, Callum. You're a man carrying something very heavy. Alone. And if you stay, if you're close to me when the moon, I'll be at the cottage. I'll lock the door. I'm not stupid. She said it gently, so he'd hear the warmth in it. I'm just not leaving.
He looked at her for a long time.
She didn't look away. Then, carefully, the way someone does something they've talked themselves out 100 times, he reached up and touched her face. Just his fingertips.
Just the side of her cheek.
What if I renew it, he said. What if I renew the covenant? Not for the village. Not for the bloodline. For what, then? For the morning. For being able to come back to myself. So that there's something to come back to. The sun dropped below the moor. The sky went red. Go back to the cottage, he said softly. Lock the door. Don't come to the moor before dawn. I'll be there when you come back, she said. She stood, walked down the hill. At the bottom she turned once, and he was still watching her. The man, still the man, but with the first tremor of something ancient moving beneath the surface. She went to the cottage. She locked the door. She sat by the window and watched the blood moon rise. This is the part of the story that cannot be fully told. Not because it's too frightening, but because language was built for human things, and what happens on the moor on the night of the blood moon is older than language. Marin would say only this later, when Sarah pressed her. He ran. All night he ran. And I think this year was different because he had something to run toward, not just away from. A covenant renewed not out of duty, but out of choice. Those are different shapes of the same thing. The wolf knew the difference. Sarah sat by the window for most of the night. She didn't sleep. She heard things on the moor, movement not threatening, just enormous. Something big moving through the darkness with a confidence that didn't need roads or paths or boundaries. Once, just before 3 a.m, she thought she heard something close to the cottage. She pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window, and something pressed back, just for a moment.
Warm. From the other side.
Then it was gone. She pressed her forehead against the glass and whispered, to the dark, I'll be here. She opened the door before he could knock a second time. He was pale. There were leaves in his hair. His feet were bare, and there were cuts on them she'd ask about later. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of the coming back. But his eyes were his. Completely, clearly, unmistakably his. She stepped back. He crossed the threshold. She didn't say anything. She put the kettle on because that is what you do. And he sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands, and she stood behind him and put her arms around his shoulders, and he held onto her wrists like someone who has just stopped drowning. You're here, he said. Not surprised. Just saying it out loud. Marking it. I'm here, she said. The kettle boiled. Outside, the moor came out of the dark slowly, the way it always does, reluctantly, incrementally, giving up its mysteries one thin stripe of light at a time. The blood moon was gone. The covenant was renewed. And in a small kitchen in a village that doesn't appear on modern maps, something new was just beginning.